How's it going, everybody? It's Sam here, and welcome back to the Morbid Vale. Today we are celebrating the channel reaching 123 subscribers. Why 123? Because the day before we were at 98 subscribers, and when we saw that we had 1, 2, 3, we just couldn't pass up the opportunity. Now we did a little poll to see what exactly we'd be doing for the special, and can you believe it? Another character build.
And this build was recommended by one of our subscribers, Zypass. Zypass? Sounds like one of those fancy prescriptions. Having a hard time getting it up, falling asleep, or having enough energy to do your work? Try Zypass, the new mystery drug that we guarantee will help you with one of those three things.
The build he recommended, and that had the most likes, was the Dovahlich Knight. I'll be honest, I had no idea what it was, but made a pretty good guess before Jay lectured me about it for 2.5 hours.
I was just explaining what a Dovahlich Knight is.
No, it was a lecture, not an explanation.
Oh, whatever. Anyways, we created a truly sinister build with a compelling backstory. Now please, allow me to introduce you to the living embodiment of death and decay, the Dovahlich.
Soldier, have you ever heard the story of the Dovahlich?
The what?
You heard me. The Dovahlich, the most powerful and terrible creature to ever walk the face of Nirn.
No, but I suppose you're going to tell me anyway.
Yes, I am. Of course I'm going to tell you the story. The story begins thousands of years ago, during the Merethic era. The ancient Nords had finally cemented their home here in Skyrim, and the dragon cult ruled over all. They worshipped the mighty dragons, and the great Alduin himself. But there was one group of dragon priests who lived in a settlement just east of Windhelm that desired to replace Alduin with a new, more powerful god.
Okay, you've got my attention.
Good! Now, in charge of this settlement were two dragon priests, Otar and Azadal, both of which had 3 lesser dragon priests below them. They had desired to do the impossible, and went against the will of the gods, to create a new race, one far more powerful than any would ever be, one that was of both Nord and dragon blood. Under the night sky and celestial lights, they called upon their dragon master. No one knows who he was. Some speculate it was Durnavir, a dragon who was powerful in the art of necromancy. Others say that it was Parthenax, the ambitious right hand of Alduin. And some believe it was a no-name dragon who has long since been deceased. As the story goes, on that night, they brought a young virgin woman before the dragon. And the priest joined hands and began to mutter some strange invocation. As the priest entered a trance, calling down the power of both Aetherius and Oblivion, a brilliant red light shot down from the heavens and enveloped the woman and the dragon. No one is entirely certain how it happened, as the light was so incredibly blinding that no one could see anything past their own feet. All they know is that at the end of the night, a child had begun to grow inside the young woman's womb.
Whoa. Hold up. a dragon laid with an old woman, and everyone could tell she was immediately pregnant.
Yes! Now may I finish the story?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. 3 nights after the ceremony, the woman went into labor. The priests were astonished at how fast the child had grown, and eagerly they prepared for the birth. The dragon returned and watched over the house of the woman, but she could not give birth to the child. As she tried to push it out, it continued to grow, and blood began to pour out of her. The priests were worried that the child would not make it, but the dragon master commanded that they bring the woman outside. They obeyed, and the dragon had them lay her on an altar. As she laid there in agony, the dragon unleashed his thumb, and fire enveloped the woman. It said that her screams could be heard all the way to Atmora. The priests were horrified and fell to their knees, believing that their master had destroyed the child. But as the smoke cleared, they saw what had been done. The young woman's body had been turned to ash, and within the ashes laid a strange creature, curled up and fast asleep. The dragon blew the ashes off the creature, and it awoke. Azadol gathered the child in his robes and took him into the main hall. The remaining ashes were washed off of the child, and the priest examined him closely. He had scales and horns, and a tail like the mighty dragon. But most of his scales were lighter in color, like the skin of the Nord woman, and his eyes burned with a deep red fire, like the very light that had beamed down upon his father and mother during the night of conception. In 3 weeks, the child had grown to almost the full size of an adolescent. However, his life was in great peril. Alduin had sensed the child's power from across Skyrim and sent a spy to the barrow. Once Alduin learned of the child's abominable conception, his fears and fury knew no bounds. He knew that the combination of dragon and mortal could be his undoing, and so he sent his armies to wipe out the settlement. One of the priests, Azadol, took the child and with a few of his servants fled across the sea. He had hoped to return to Atmora with the child, but instead they discovered an island.
Wait a minute. I got some questions first.
All right, go.
You're talking about soul slime, right? How exactly did they get there without Alduin finding them? Didn't you say he sensed the child's power from across Skyrim?
I did. Before they fled in their ship, Otar and Azadol had placed a spell over the child to shield him so Alduin could not sense his power.
Right. And what about the settlement? I grew up in Windhelm and travelled all around the area. There's no ruins east of the city.
That's because it was destroyed, you moron. Alduin wanted to ensure that there was nowhere for the child to hide. He had unleashed such a powerful shout that the cliff which the settlement was on collapsed and fell into the sea of ghosts.
Oh, alright. Yeah, that makes sense. So wait a minute. He's half dragon and half Nord. Does that mean that this child was the first dragonborn?
Yes, he is the first dragonborn. Now, if you wouldn't mind ceasing your questions, I'd like to continue. Within a few more weeks, the child had grown full size. And over the next 5 years, he learned all he could from Azadol. Like the dragon priest, he was exceptional at both destruction and necromantic spells. As their community continued to thrive and barrows began to be built, an alarming thing happened. The dragonborn had begun to slow down, and his scales began to rot off of his body. The power of his soul was so great that his mortal shell could no longer contain it. determined to continue living and usurp Alduin, the Dragonborn sought to bind his soul to an object that could never be destroyed. But he knew of no such object. At that moment, he looked south and saw the Red Mountain. With his most trusted servants, the Dragonborn traveled to the Red Mountain, and deep within the volcano, he began his work. With the power that emanated from the volcano's depths, rare minerals, and a sample of his own blood, the Dragonborn created a powerful blade that none, except for himself, could alter. His servants gathered around him, their hands joined as they began to mutter a dark invocation. He threw the sword into the lava and unbound his soul with a potent spell. He spoke something in the dragon tongue, and soon his soul was ripped from his body, and it flew down into the pit of lava. Quickly, the blade shot out and hovered before the Dragonborn, as his soul continued to enter into the sword. The red fire in his eyes faded, and his scales ceased to decay. As the last bit of his soul entered the sword, a blast of powerful red energy unleashed from the sword, knocking back everyone except for the Dragonborn himself. He arose from his knees and gripped the hilt of the blade. He felt the energy humming from within and gave the blade a powerful swing. Another burst of red energy flew out of the blade, and a large hole was carved into the mountainside. Quickly, the Dragonborn became known as Dilmar, the Dovahlich.
Dilmar? What's that? A title? A name?
Yes, that is his name. It is a name from the dragon tongue itself. It means undead terror. Now, as I was saying, he began to assemble his armies. Dragons who heard his thu'um rejected Alduin's lordship and joined Dilmar's ranks. He raised hordes of the undead to fight at his side, and the display of power drew the attention and submission of many elves and Nords alike. His ships eventually landed in Skyrim, and his armies marched upon the various barrows, wiping out the soldiers, but leaving those who did not brandish a weapon against them. Dilmar challenged Alduin in single combat, and the World Eater accepted. In Labyrinthian, they faced each other, but it was not much of a battle between the two, as Alduin was far weaker than Dilmar. It seemed victory was at hand, but the Dragonborn had been betrayed. Otar, one of his most trusted allies, turned against him and trapped Dilmar in a magical barrier. Enraged at this betrayal, Dilmar unleashed his rage and shattered the magical barriers with his sword. He reached out his hand and with magic began to scramble Otar's brain within his own skull. This brief distraction gave Alduin the chance he needed. He bit down on Dilmar's head and thrashed him around before tossing him into the tower. The shock was so great that Dilmar lost his grip on his sword. Alduin continued to attack, throwing everything he had at Dilmar, until his body was broken and bloodied. But Alduin could not land a fatal blow. When he realized that the power he once sensed was no longer in Dilmar, but in the blade, he attempted to steal it for himself. But Azador, disguised as a simple baker, had stolen the sword before Alduin and fled back to Solstheim with it. Enraged that Dilmar could not die, Alduin ordered that he be buried alive, far from his throne, and so it was. Many had witnessed the thrashing that Dilmar had dealt Alduin. And 50 years later, Alduin was banished from Skyrim by the Nord rebels. Thousands of years have passed, and Dilmar remains inside of his coffin, but not suffering as Alduin hoped. Rather, he is in deep and peaceful sleep. Due to the ritual he had performed, Dilmar no longer requires to breathe, for he is the Dovahlich.
That's a pretty interesting story. But where'd you hear it? It's not a story I've ever heard before.
It's an ancient story, passed down through the generations of Dilmar's most faithful servants. We seek two things: the revival of the Master's empire, and the death of the traitor. You see, Otar was not the only one to betray the Master. Azadal had also betrayed him. My family discovered that Azadal had orchestrated the Master's downfall. He told Otar what to do and when to do it. He hoped that Alduin and the Master were both wounded enough that they would die from their wounds. But when neither did, he fled and hid the Master's blade, knowing that any who possessed it would try to return it to the gravesite. But both he and Otar are not truly dead, for they have become liches themselves, mocking our Master, the first Dragonborn and the first true lich to ever exist.
Wait a minute. You're saying that you and your family worshipped this Dovahlich? You got to be joking. This is just a story for children. There's no such thing as a Dovahlich, and there's no secret cult who worships him.
You're right. There is no cult who worships him anymore. Only me. The rest of my family is dead, and the other families thought as you did, that it was just a story, so they abandoned him. But it is not a story for little children. Why do you think Ulfric let me come out here? Why do you think we've been out here digging holes in seemingly random locations? I convinced Ulfric that there is an ancient Nord weapon out here that would ensure victory over the war. The Master rests in these woods, and once he is revived, both Ulfric and General Talius will either kneel or be destroyed.
You're mad. There's nothing out here, you old fool. You troll, you better come quick. We found something. It looks like a coffin.
You were saying? Open it, now!
As the Stormcloaks began to open the coffin, Ulfric arrived to see how the excavation was going. While everyone was distracted, Imperials emerged from the forest and began to attack. The coffin lid was open enough that the Dovahlich could smell the blood being spilled. He threw open the lid and stumbled out. Weak and disoriented, he fell down on top of an Imperial corpse. He ripped out the soldier's throat and began to drink his blood, slowly regaining his strength. The old man who was telling the story had seen the Dovahlich feeding and raised his sword and cried out,
"Victory! The Master has returned!"
But this foolish act gave one Imperial soldier the chance to run him through with his blade. One of the soldiers had been knocked back, and his warhammer fell and hit the Dovahlich in the back of the head. Days later, Dilmar woke on the cart with the Stormcloaks. While many feared their execution, Dilmar thought how ridiculous it was that these men were going to try and execute him. Clearly they knew nothing of who he was. He kneeled before the executioner's block, knowing that he'd just get right back up once they tried to behead him. However, before they could even attempt to behead him, Dilmar saw the black wings soar from behind the mountain. Alduin had unintentionally set his greatest enemy free, and Dilmar followed Ralof out of Helgen, but left the Nord once he was free. Years of immobility have weakened the Dovahlich, and thus he has to regain his skills. He takes up a greatsword and wastes no time in cutting down all the men and women who hide in the mountains like weak, spineless fools. After obtaining his ancient ring from Nemira, the Dovahlich begins to hone his powers over undeath. He had lost much of his abilities, even forgetting the simplest of conjuration spells. As time goes on, he uses the many souls he's ensnared to increase his knowledge of enchanting. He sells the useless enchanted items to nearby blacksmiths, and by doing so gives him a boost to his speechcraft. His power over the destructive elements has also diminished, and so he masters all the spells he can. He becomes a master of the elements, but refrains from using the full power of lightning, so he has fresh corpses for his army. Not long after, he masters his power over the minds of mortals in Daedra, bending their will to serve his. As time goes on, he decides it's time to hone his skills over steel. He works hard, mastering his weapon and armor crafting skills, until his blades are sharp enough to pierce a dragon's scaly hide with ease. Now for the gear. In Helgen, the Dovahlich kills one of the Imperial legates and puts on her bloodied armor. He wears it for a long time, eventually swapping it out for sturdier pieces. He uses common greatswords in his quests, and like the armor, drops it when he finds a better one. During his travel to Solstheim, he partners with a Dunmer in excavating some ancient ruins that belong to his traitorous ally, Azadal. He spares no expense, as he greatly desires the traitor's death. He eventually obtains 2 pieces of Azadal's ancient Nord armor, the chest piece and his boots of water walking. He likes the feel of wearing ancient Nord armor again, but sees Azadal's other armor pieces as weak and inferior. He crafts a pair of ancient Nord gauntlets and imbues them with his very wrath. Dilmar's horns prevent him from wearing any helmets, and so he prefers his jade sapphire circlet, which he has enchanted with great power. His amulet is also rather unique, and boosts his already unrelenting power. The most important and powerful item in his arsenal is his reliquary, Bloodskull. The blade is incredibly potent, as it contains the Dovahlich's soul. By giving the blade a mighty swing, the Dovahlich sends out a powerful wave of destructive energy from his sword. The weapon is unable to be destroyed. However, the Dovahlich is able to alter it, as the sword only yields to his hands. And now for the gameplay. In the start of his journey, the Dovahlich realizes that the entire world has changed, and thus lends aid to those he sees great potential in. He does this to gain powerful allies and a greater insight into the world he now lives in. He collects many books, especially those that may help him in unlocking more knowledge of the arcane arts, and textbooks that shed light on the mysterious events that transpired during his slumber. He gains aid from both the Companions and the Volkihar clan, though he feels the Daedric chains trying to latch on to his distant soul, and promptly removes the curses as soon as they hold no purpose for him. When in combat, the Dovahlich typically allows his servants to take the lead of the battle, keeping his distance unless absolutely necessary. Should a target strike him from afar, he will unleash a powerful blast of elements to destroy them. Should his servants prove to be weaker than he anticipated, he will cast an elemental cloak and draw a Bloodskull from his back before slashing away at his targets. Should he become surrounded, the Dovahlich will channel his unbound storms to slay everyone nearby. Like all powerful deities, the Dovahlich enjoys toying with mortals from time to time. During those moments, he will cast powerful frenzy spells at his enemies and watch as they tear each other apart. At other times, he will use terror spells and watch as his undead servants hack away at the cowering mortals. And now for the timeline! After leaving Helgen, the Dovahlich makes his way to Markarth, smelling the sweet scent of unholy decay. He discovers the cult of Namira and soon acquires her ring. The ring, which in fact once belonged to him. After the betrayal of his allies, it was given to Namira. He thinks for a moment about informing Whiterun of the dragon attacks, but realizes that Alduin is far weaker than before, and it will take time for him to regain his strength. The Dovahlich heads to Winterhold and soon masters the arcane arts. He discovers many secrets in the college and soon becomes their archmage. The students and staff make formidable allies, but he knows that he will require greater power if he wishes to rebuild his army. After finally having enough strength to go against Alduin and his priests, Dilmar heads to Whiterun to see if they have any news on the black-winged dragon. There's little help from them, but he gives the court wizard the dragonstone he found in Bleakfall's barrow, in hopes that the wizard may know something about its purpose. A dragon attacks, but Dilmar can sense that it is not the one he seeks. After helping Whiterun with their dragon problem and consuming the soul of said dragon, the Dovahlich makes his way to High Hrothgar to better develop his Thuum. After discovering that someone else had claimed the horn of Jurgen Windcaller from Ustengrav, Dilmar follows the letter's commands and heads to Riverwood. Upon his arrival in the small town, he is attacked by strange cultists, and is surprised when one of them proclaims that he serves Miraak. He ignores it for a time, focusing on the horn. He is once again surprised, this time to find a member of the Blades, and quickly realizes that he may yet form a devout cult once again. He helps bolster the ranks of the Blades, only placing the most powerful and loyal of allies, save for a special few. With the Blades at his beck and call, and the Greybeards giving him the locations of ancient word walls, the Dovahlich wastes no time in slaying every dragon he can to become more powerful than ever. During this time, he is continuously hounded by the cultists, and finally heads to Solstheim to see if there truly is another dragonborn with the name of a Dove. Upon reaching the ashy shores of Raven Rock, Dilmar hears his sword calling to him. He ignores the dumber official and follows the cries of Bloodskull. He travels deep into the mine and reclaims his other half. With Bloodskull in his hands, he's finally complete, and his power increased tenfold. He escapes the barrows, but not before killing one of the arrogant disciples of Alduin. He discovers a black book and claims one of the great secrets of Apocrypha. Bloodskull tells him of Azadol's betrayal all those centuries ago, and leads him to the dragon priest's resting place. There they find a Dunmer excavator camping upon the ruins. Dilmar partners with the Dunmer and returns periodically to take care of the drog-infested barrows. In between those visits, he decides to deal with Miraak. He is not surprised that Miraak had claimed his palace for himself, but is enraged at how poorly it has been kept. Their first meeting baffles the Dovahlich, as the power Miraak wielded was on par with that of a Daedric prince. Intrigued with how Miraak came to obtain such power, Dilmar seeks out the black books of Hermaeus Mora and uncovers ancient, powerful secrets. He eventually obtains some of Azadol's armor and more power than Miraak could ever dream of wielding. The Dovahlich finally faces the arrogant dragon priest at the summit of Apocrypha and has no trouble in brutalizing him. However, instead of striking the final blow, Dilmar watches as Miraak is impaled from behind by Hermaeus Mora himself. He helps Solstheim for a while, as a good ruler helps his subjects. With a hold over the people and weaklings of Solstheim, the Dovahlich returns to Skyrim. He decides that it's finally time to crush Alduin under his heel. But he needs a plan. He speaks to the Greybeards and Jarl Balgruuf and realizes that some sort of truce must be made. The Civil War leaders agree to a meeting in High Hrothgar, and there they discuss the terms of the truce. There, in the council chamber, he sees the true colors of the Imperials and Stormcloaks. General Tullius is a loyal military tactician who only serves the Empire. And Ulfric is a narcissistic, power-hungry mortal who speaks of justice for his people. Indecisive as to who he should support, Dilmar does his best to give both sides equal compensation in the truce. Before he goes to Whiterun, Dilmar is stopped by Esbern and Delphine. They demand that Parthenax must die, and while he had already considered the option, the Dovahlich is not happy being dictated to. He decides to remain silent for a time and appease the acting Grand Master. As he absorbs the soul of Parthenax, the Dovahlich smiles and mutters, "At last I have found you, Father." With the full power of his heritage now inside of him, Dilmar becomes more of an unstoppable beast. His Thuum is unparalleled, his mastery of the arcane arts unmatched, and Bloodskull sharper than ever. He proceeds to Whiterun and ensnares Odahviing. The mighty dragon submits and takes his new master to Skuldafn. After slaying the dragons and Draugr that guard the barrow, Dilmar enters the portal to Sovngarde, and there he destroys Alduin. He sees the soul of his ancient foe get caught up into the vortex above, and knows that it will only be a matter of time before Alduin returns. The Dovahlich departs from the Hall of Heroes, and stands before the mighty dragons as their new lord and master. Though many of the dragons submit to his will, there are those who continue to rebuke his lordship and attack him later on. Despite all of the power he has obtained, the Dovahlich realizes that there are more alliances to forge. He seeks out the so-called Dark Brotherhood he once read about, and in a matter of weeks becomes their new leader. As he is truly a member of the dead, he can hear the Night Mother's words and obeys her so long as her will aligns with his. From there, he takes over the Volkihar clan, but as he did with lycanthropy, he cures his body from the Daedric affliction when it no longer serves any use to him. Now for the powers. The Dovahlich has a complete arsenal of devastating abilities at his disposal. Unbound Soul is a simple but powerful technique used by the Dovahlich. He slows time and circles his enemies, slashing at them with Bloodskull. Wrath is one of Dilmar's more heinous powers. Through sheer concentration, he unleashes his dragon's wrath, poisoning the minds of his foes with blinding rage. As they begin to kill one another, the Dovahlich casts a firestorm, adding to the already devastating chaos. Undead Terror is the most devastating power that Dovahlich has at his disposal. He starts by sending his servants into battle, taking on his dragon aspect, casting Hysteria, then massacring his cowering enemies with Bloodskull. Skyrim was in turmoil. The Civil War had ravaged many of the holds, but none suffered quite like Solitude and Windhelm. The cities were filled with sick civilians. What little food they had was moldy and filled with maggots. They believed that either side was attacking their caravans, but in truth they were taken by the same person. The Dovahlich had sent groups to ambush the caravans, steal their supplies, and massacre their soldiers. These ambush patrols were comprised of members of every faction. The Thieves' Guild Dark Brotherhood companions, Volkihar vampires, and the Blades all worked together under their master's banner. As the warring sides continued their senseless battles, the Dovahlich obtained support from all the other holds, promising them a quick end to the war, and as a sign of good faith, gave them the food and gold he captured from the caravans. He set up his strongholds inside Labyrinthian, Corvinland, and Bleak Falls Barrow. From those 3 points, he could send his armies to every part of Skyrim. In a matter of days, Windhelm and Solitude fell to his power. Both General Tullius and Ulfric Stormcloak were brought before the Dovahlich, and each was given a chance to kneel and accept him as the new emperor. Ulfric refused and prepared to shout, but as he did, the Dovahlich placed a reflective ward over Ulfric's mouth. Before he knew it, it was too late, and Ulfric's head exploded from the power of his own Thu'um. General Tullius was petrified in fear as he stared at Ulfric's bloodied corpse, but the Dovahlich commanded his attention, and General Tullius stared into the dead eyes of his captor and could not help but kneel. Titus Mead II was dead. There was no heir, and the Dragonborn had the full support of Skyrim and its people. Tullius acknowledged Dilmar as the true Emperor of Tamriel, and with that submission, the Dovahlich could begin his conquest of Cyrodiil. Before, he'd only desired to control Skyrim, but when he learned of the ancient dragon emperors, he knew his kingdom could be far greater than that of Alduin's. Delphine refused to help the Dragonborn anymore after his Draugr and dragons laid siege to Windhelm and Solitude, and so Odahviing swallowed her whole. With the full loyalty of the dragons, the companions, Volgar clan, Blades, enthralled Greybeards, and the armies of Draugr and Skyrim's warriors donned in Daedric armor, the Dovahlich flew on the back of Odahviing to Cyrodiil. No one attempted to stop the armies of the Dovahlich, and all in the city knelt before him as he walked into the white gold tower. As he took a seat on the dragon throne, the fires ignited, but they were black as night. Akatosh appeared before the throne and demanded that Dilmar remove himself from it. But the Dovahlich had no desire to heed the words of a toothless worm like Akatosh. As he reached out his hand, he consumed the soul of Akatosh himself. The chief divine fell, his body withered and grey. The other divines appeared in a flash and prepared to fight, but the Dovahlich stretched out his hand once more and forced them to their knees. He commanded that they serve him, and while most refused, a few obeyed. Arkay, Zenithar, and Talos submitted to the Dovahlich, fearful for what he may do. For their submission, he gave them each an artifact. To Arkay, he gave the mace of Molag Bal. To Zenithar, he gave the skull of corruption. And to Talos, he gave Umbra. As each of them took the cursed artifacts in their hands, their wills were completely bound to Dilmar's. The other divines suffered the same fate as Akatosh, and their souls were consumed. With the souls and powers of the divines, Dilmar had achieved what no other could have ever dreamed of. Not only had he achieved godhood, but he was now the god above all gods. And his kingdom knew no end, and prospered forever under his eternal reign.
We hope you enjoyed our 123rd subscriber special. Thanks again to Zypass for this wonderful recommendation, and a special thanks to all of you for supporting the channel.
Now please, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell icon to be notified of our future videos. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody, and we'll see you all here next time on the Morbid Veil.